For walking out after my parents called me useless in the house I helped save? I'm Beatrice, 47, and in my family, I was always the daughter people apologize for before I even opened my mouth. My mother had this soft little laugh she used whenever relatives asked about me. She would tilt her head, touch her necklace and say, "Beatrice has always been complicated." Complicated meant I didn't perform the way they wanted. I didn't post pictures of every dinner I attended. I didn't brag about money. I didn't show up in expensive clothes with a story about how important I was. I kept my life quiet, and in my family quiet meant suspicious. My older brother Grant, 51, was the opposite. Grant could walk into a room 5 minutes late, wearing a watch too shiny for daylight, and my parents would act like the guest of honor had arrived. My father, Frank, would straighten in his chair. My mother, Ellen, would start smiling before Grant even said hello. His wife, Lydia, would glide in after him, polished and calm, like she was arriving at a charity luncheon instead of a family dinner where somebody had probably forgotten to put out enough forks. Grant was the son in the framed photos. Grant at graduation. Grant shaking hands with someone in a suit. Grant holding a champagne glass at some event where nobody could explain what was being celebrated. On the hallway wall of my parents' house, there were so many pictures of him that it almost looked like I had been a cousin who visited once in the late 90s and accidentally got included in a group shot. I was usually near the edge of those photos, half turned, half smiling, half wanted. At family dinners I brought store-bought pie because nobody ever told me what to bring. I sat wherever there was room. If the main dining table filled up, I was the first one moved to a card table near the hallway. Nobody said it directly, but the message was always there. Grant was a headline. I was a footnote they kept trying to erase. For years I let them believe whatever they wanted. Part of that was pride. Part of it was exhaustion. And part of it was my own mistake. I thought if I quietly helped enough, eventually somebody would notice I wasn't the failure they kept describing. They never did. They noticed the help. They just never connected it to me in a way that required gratitude. The first time I paid the back property taxes on my parents' house, my father had called me sounding strange. Not scared exactly because Frank didn't do scared, but short. Tight. He said there had been a misunderstanding with the county, and that Grant was looking into it. I asked how much. He snapped, "That is not your concern." 2 hours later my mother called crying. Not loud crying. The careful kind. The kind meant to make me feel guilty before I even knew what I had done wrong. "Your father is under a lot of stress," she said. "Grant is trying, but things take time." I paid it that afternoon through a direct arrangement. I saved the confirmation in a folder labeled only by date. Not proof. Not family betrayal. Just dates, bills, receipts, transfers. I thought that made me reasonable. Looking back, it made me available. After that came the insurance gap. Then an emergency repair my parents said Grant was handling. Except the contractor called me because my mother gave him my number. Then a legal retainer tied to one of Grant's loan problems that somehow threatened my parents' assets. Then late fees. Penalties. A utility issue. Another tax problem. It was never one big rescue. It was 100 quiet ones. Every time my mother would say, "Family helps family, Beatrice." Every time my father would act like accepting help from me was a temporary inconvenience, not a pattern. And every time Grant stood in the center of the room being praised for responsibility, I kept my mouth shut. That was on me. The dinner that changed everything started with a text from my mother in the family group chat. Sunday dinner at 6 o'clock. Celebrating Grant's new chapter. Your father wants everyone together for an important family conversation. Please be kind and don't make this difficult. There were 3 heart emojis after it, which somehow made it feel more like a summons. Grant replied with a thumbs up. Lydia wrote, "Looking forward to seeing everyone." Aunt Marlene sent a little folded hands emoji. A cousin asked if she should bring salad. My mother replied to everyone except me. I stared at the message for a long time. Grant's new chapter could mean anything. In our family, Grant's new chapters usually meant someone else was about to pay for the previous chapter. I almost didn't go. Then my attorney, Peter, called me that Friday about some documents I had asked him to review. I had started getting uncomfortable months earlier, when my mother mentioned simplifying things for the future, And my father made a comment about how the house should stay with the child who understood legacy. Legacy was Frank's favorite word when he meant control. Peter was calm as always. He had the kind of voice that made legal trouble sound like weather. If they present anything to you, he said, do not sign. Do not initial. Do not write comments in the margins. Take a photo if you can and walk away. I know, I said. Beatrice, he said, you know it. But with family, people often forget what they know. He was right. So on Sunday, I went prepared to be polite, not obedient. My parents' house looked the same as always from the outside. The porch light was on even though it was still bright. Through the front window, I could see movement in the dining room and the glow of the old chandelier my mother refused to replace because she said it had history. Inside, the house smelled like casseroles, coffee, and furniture polish. There were paper napkins fanned out on the counter, disposable plates stacked beside the real dishes, and an extra card table set up near the hallway. I knew before anyone said a word that the card table was where I would end up. My mother kissed the air near my cheek. You're early, she said, like I had committed a small social crime. I said I'd come at 6 o'clock. It's fine. Her eyes moved over my clothes. I was wearing black pants and a plain sweater. Nothing flashy. Nothing worth discussing. Naturally, she discussed it. Comfortable. That's nice. I set the pie on the counter. Where do you want this? Oh, anywhere. Anywhere meant she would forget it until after everyone had eaten the dessert Lydia brought. As I stepped toward the dining room, I noticed a folder on the sideboard. It was thick, cream-colored, with a sticky note on top that said, Estate Update. Another note had my name written on it in my father's blocky handwriting. My stomach tightened. I didn't touch it. Then my mother's shared iPad lit up on the kitchen counter. It was one of those family devices nobody respected as private because everyone used it for recipes, photos, and video calls. A message preview slid across the screen under Grant's name. She'll sign if Dad embarrasses her enough. I stopped breathing for half a second. Another preview appeared. She always folds when Mom cries. My mother from the dining room called, Beatrice, can you grab the serving spoon from the drawer? Sure, I said. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. I walked to the drawer, opened it, took the spoon, and while my body did ordinary things, my eyes stayed on the iPad. A third message came in. Need the house papers clean before she interferes later. Then my mother's reply appeared. She still needs family. She won't risk being completely alone. Something inside me went very still. Not numb. Not broken. Still. I waited until my mother stepped into the dining room again. Then I picked up my phone and took pictures of the screen. Clear. Steady. No shaking. I emailed them to myself and to Peter with the subject line, Dinner Documents. Then I carried the serving spoon into the dining room and smiled like I hadn't just watched my family plan my humiliation as a signing strategy. Grant arrived 10 minutes later with Lydia. He kissed my mother's cheek, clapped my father on the shoulder, and gave the room the relaxed smile of a man who had never been asked to prove anything. There he is, my father said. The man of the hour. Grant laughed. Come on, Dad. But he didn't look embarrassed. He looked fed. Lydia hugged my mother and gave me a polite smile. Beatrice. Good to see you. You too. Her gaze flicked down to my sweater. I always admire how little you care about all the fuss. That was Lydia's talent. She could insult you in a tone that sounded suitable for a thank you card. Dinner began exactly how I expected. Grant and Lydia sat near my parents at the main table. Aunt Marlene sat close enough to hear everything but far enough to pretend she had missed things later. I ended up at the card table with 2 cousins and a stack of disposable plates that bent under the weight of pot roast and potatoes. My father stood to toast Grant before the food was even passed. Some people talk about responsibility, he said, lifting his glass. Some people live it. Grant has always understood family, duty, and sacrifice. Your mother and I are proud of the man he's become. Everyone lifted glasses. I lifted mine too because I had learned a long time ago that refusing the ritual only made me the problem. Grant nodded modestly. Lydia touched his arm. My mother looked across the room at me and smiled. Beatrice, she said, are you still doing those little projects? The table got quiet in that hungry way families get quiet when someone is about to be made smaller. I cut a piece of roast with a plastic knife. I keep busy. Lydia gave a soft laugh. Beatrice has always been hard to read. Mysterious, I suppose. Though there's not much to report when you keep things so private. Grant leaned back. Some of us had to grow up and think about the future. My father nodded like Grant had just delivered scripture. I looked at Aunt Marlene. She looked down at her plate. There it was. The family talent. Silence dressed up as manners. For most of dinner I let them talk. Grant spoke about plans, investments, responsibility, and making sure Mom and Dad were taken care of. He used impressive words without specific numbers. He mentioned positioning assets twice. Lydia corrected him once when he got a date wrong, and his jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. My father didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to. Then, after dessert plates were cleared and my pie remained unopened on the counter, my father brought out the folder. Now, he said, placing it beside his plate, we need to talk like adults. My mother folded her hands. Grant looked at me. Lydia suddenly became very interested in smoothing her napkin. My father opened the folder and pulled out papers with sticky notes already attached. Your mother and I are getting older, he said. The house, the accounts, everything. We need to make things simple. Grant has been helping us think clearly. I said nothing. He continued. The family home should go to the person equipped to handle it. Grant is stable. Grant understands responsibility. And I understand excuses? I asked. His eyes narrowed. Don't start. I haven't started anything. My mother gave me the look she used when she wanted me to shrink. Please don't embarrass us tonight. Grant slid a document toward me. It's just an acknowledgement. A waiver, basically. So there won't be confusion later. A pen had already been placed beside my plate. That detail almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ugly and so small. The pen. Like the betrayal had office supplies. I picked up the document but didn't read past the first few lines. I didn't need to. Peter had warned me. I set it down. I'm not signing anything tonight. My father's face hardened. You don't need to make this ugly. Just sign what's fair. I don't sign legal documents between salad and dessert. Nobody moved. Grant's smile thinned. Don't turn this into one of your victim stories. I said I'm not signing without legal review. Lydia sighed softly. Maybe if you communicated better, people wouldn't misunderstand you. My father pushed his chair back. Not all the way. Just enough to make noise. You always make things harder than they need to be, he said. I'm protecting myself. From what? He snapped. Your family. I looked at him. Tonight? Yes. My mother gasped like I had slapped her. Frank's voice dropped. That was always worse than yelling. After everything we did for you. There it was. The old doorway. The one they expected me to walk through with my head down. What exactly did you do for me? I asked quietly. My father's face flushed. We raised you, he said. Fed you. Put a roof over your head. And this is the thanks we get. Suspicion? Drama? You are almost 50 years old and still the biggest disappointment I ever raised. A fork hit a plate somewhere down the table. My cousin stared at her lap. Aunt Marlene closed her eyes. Grant smirked. My mother touched a tissue to the corner of her eye before any tears had actually formed. Your father is only saying this because he loves you, she said. No, I said. He's saying it because he thinks it will work. My father stood then. You think you're too good for this family, he said. Fine. Get out. Get out and see how long you last without us. The room went silent. Even Grant stopped smiling for a second. My father pointed toward the hallway. Go live on the street if you think you don't need family. I sat there for one breath. Then another. The old me would have explained. The old me would have said, Dad, I paid the tax bill. Mom, I handled the insurance. Grant, you know exactly what I covered. The old me would have opened my chest on that table and begged them to identify a heart. Instead, I smiled. Not a big smile. Not cruel. Just enough for Grant's eyes to flicker. I stood, picked up my purse, and took my keys from beside my untouched coffee. My mother whispered, "Beatrice, don't be dramatic." I looked at the folder, then at my father. "You called me useless in a house I helped save." His expression shifted, but only for a second. "What is that supposed to mean?" he said. "It means I'm leaving." I walked to the kitchen. My pie was still on the counter, unopened, the plastic lid fogged slightly from the warm room. I left it there. Behind me, I heard my father say, "Let her go." Grant said something too low to hear. Then from the hallway I caught one sentence clearly. "She'll still help if things go bad," Grant said. "She always does." I kept walking. I made it to my car without crying. I made it 2 blocks without crying. At the 3rd red light my throat locked, and the tears came so hard I had to pull into an empty lot and put the car in park. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from finally believing people mean what they have been showing you for years. My phone buzzed before I even reached home. "Mom, your father is very upset. You need to apologize before this becomes permanent." Then another. "Mom, family means sacrifice." Then Grant. "Grant, that was embarrassing. You need to fix this." I stared at the messages until the screen dimmed. Then I called Peter. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Are you safe?" he asked. "Yes." "Did they present documents?" "Yes." "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." I looked at the dark windshield, my own face reflected back at me in the glass. "Start the notices tomorrow," I said. Peter paused. Not because he was surprised, because he understood what it cost me. All of them. All of them. Nothing informal anymore. The next morning I made coffee and opened my banking portal. There were recurring payments I had stopped seeing as choices. Insurance support. Tax installments. A small automatic transfer into an account my mother used for household gaps. A reserve connected to legal fees from a problem Grant had created and then described to my parents as temporary paperwork. I canceled what I wasn't legally obligated to maintain. I revoked informal permissions. I downloaded confirmations as PDFs and sent them to Peter. No long texts. No announcements. No family group chat speech. Paper trails had protected them for years. Now paper trails would protect me. Peter sent formal letters by the end of the week. They were dry, clear, and beautiful in the way boundaries can be beautiful when you have lived too long without them. Ms. Beatrice will not sign estate, property, or financial documents presented outside independent legal review. Ms. Beatrice will not continue voluntary payments or informal support arrangements. All financial communication should be directed through this office. My father called within 20 minutes of receiving his letter. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Beatrice, this is childish. You don't bring lawyers into family disagreements. Call me back." My mother called after him. "Honey, I know feelings were hurt, but you have to understand your father's position." By the next week her tone changed. "Beatrice, there seems to be some confusion with the insurance. Can you just call me? We don't need to involve Peter in every little thing." Then 3 days later. "Your father received a notice. Something about taxes. I'm sure it's a mistake. Call me before he gets more upset." I listened to each voicemail once, saved them, and didn't respond. The family group chat shifted too. First it was judgment. "Grant, this is exactly why these things should have been handled cleanly. Lydia, everyone is under stress. Some people are making it worse. Mom, Beatrice, silence is not mature." Then came confusion. "Mom, does anyone know why the insurance office says prior payment arrangements changed?" Aunt Marlene. "Ellen, maybe call them directly?" "Dad, I did. They were not helpful." Then came panic. "Mom, Beatrice, please call me." "Dad, enough. Pick up the phone." Grant stopped texting for a while. That was when I knew something else had surfaced. Peter called me on a Thursday afternoon. "I received contact from an attorney representing your parents," he said. "Already?" "Yes." The tone suggests they expected me to be intimidated by the word family. Despite myself, I laughed once. Peter continued. "There is also an issue involving your brother. A lender contacted your parents regarding documents tied to projected proceeds from the house." I closed my eyes. So he did it. It appears he represented future access to assets he doesn't control. There may also be use of your parents' personal information in ways they need independent counsel to review. Are they exposed? They need their own lawyer. Not Grant's. Not yours. Their own. I looked at the folder on my desk. Dates. Receipts. Transfers. Screenshots. Notices. Years of being useful to people who called me useless. What do they want? I asked. A meeting. Of course they did. My father left a voicemail that night. We are having a meeting Monday. You will be there. This has gone far enough. You made your point. I sent it to Peter. He replied with one sentence. I will respond. The meeting was held in a conference room that smelled like coffee, toner, and expensive carpet. My parents were already there when I arrived with Peter. Frank sat at the head of the table like the room belonged to him. Ellen sat beside him clutching a purse in her lap. Grant was on the other side, jaw tight, phone face down in front of him. Lydia sat next to him, perfectly dressed, but her face had a brittle look I had never seen before. Aunt Marlene was there too. I hadn't expected that. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My father looked at Peter, then at me. So this is what we're doing now, he said. Peter pulled out a chair for me. Good morning. Frank ignored him. We're here because Beatrice overreacted. I sat down. Grant leaned forward. This should never have become a legal issue. It became a legal issue when legal documents were pushed at my client during a family dinner after written messages discussed embarrassing her into signing, Peter said. The room went still. My mother's eyes darted to me. Grant said, What messages? I opened my folder and slid the printed screenshots across the table. Nobody touched them at first. So Peter turned them around and placed them in front of my parents. She'll sign if Dad embarrasses her enough. She always folds when Mom cries. Need the house papers clean before she interferes later. She still needs family. She won't risk being completely alone. The timestamps were clear. The names were clear. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked at Grant. Grant looked at me. This is private, he said. I almost smiled again. So was my humiliation. You made that public. Lydia picked up one page. Her eyes moved fast across the printout. Grant, she said quietly. He didn't answer. Frank cleared his throat. That was inappropriate, but this doesn't change the fact that you have created a mess. No, Peter said, opening his own folder. Let's be precise. Ms. Beatrice discontinued voluntary support. She didn't create the underlying obligations. He laid out the records one by one. Property tax payment. Date. Amount. Confirmation. Insurance reinstatement. Date. Amount. Confirmation. Emergency repair payment. Date. Contractor invoice. Legal retainer. Date. Memo line. Penalty reimbursement. Date. Bank record. Another property tax payment. Another insurance gap. A household transfer. The table filled with paper. My mother stared at it like the pages had crawled out of a wall. My father's face changed slowly. Not into remorse. Not yet. Into calculation. He was trying to build a version of reality where he had known this and still had authority. He couldn't find one fast enough. Aunt Marlene whispered. Ellen. My mother didn't look at her. Peter continued. These payments were voluntary support, not an ongoing obligation. Ms. Beatrice is not required to continue financing expenses for people who are simultaneously attempting to pressure her into signing away her legal interests. Grant snapped. She should have told us she had money. There it was. Not thank you. Not I'm sorry. Not how long did you carry this. She should have told us she had money. I looked at him. Why? Grant blinked. So everyone understood the situation, he said. No, I said. You didn't need me to be honest. You needed me to stay quiet. His face reddened. You love this, he said. You love humiliating us. I leaned back slightly. Grant, you planned a dinner to humiliate me into signing documents. Now you're upset the documents are better than yours. Lydia's head turned toward him. What does that mean? She asked. Peter took out another set of papers. I recommend everyone be careful here. he said. There are loan documents and communications that appear to reference projected proceeds from a property transfer that had not occurred and was not guaranteed. My father stiffened. What loan documents? Grant reached for the papers. Peter didn't let them go. These are copies, Peter said. Your counsel can obtain the relevant records. I am not your attorney, and I recommend you obtain independent counsel before making further statements. Lydia stared at Grant. Tell me you didn't use their information. Grant's mouth opened then closed. It's not as bad as it looks, he said. My mother made a small sound. For the first time in my life, I watched the family story crack in real time. Not shatter. That would have been too clean. Crack. My father looked smaller when he turned toward Grant. Still angry. Still proud. But now the anger had nowhere safe to land. We thought you had it handled, he said. Grant rubbed both hands over his face. I was handling it. With our information? Ellen asked. He looked at her then and I saw panic. Real panic. Not polished frustration. Not golden child inconvenience. Panic. I was trying to keep things moving, he said. Aunt Marlene finally spoke. By setting Beatrice up? Everyone looked at her. She swallowed. I saw what happened at dinner. We all did. My father glared. Marlene, stay out of this. No, she said, though her voice shook. I stayed out of too much already. That landed harder than I expected. My mother started crying then. Real tears this time, I think. Or maybe tears are always real to the person using them. We didn't know, she said to me. Beatrice, we didn't know you were paying all of that. I looked at her tissues, her trembling hands, her careful pain. You didn't know because knowing would have required you to treat me differently. She flinched. That's not fair, she whispered. It is fair, I said. You accepted help when it arrived. You just never asked where it came from because the failure story was more useful. My father's palm hit the table, not hard enough to be a threat, but hard enough to try to reclaim the room. Enough. You are still our daughter. Peter looked at him calmly. Miss Beatrice is not responsible for financing relationships that are abusive to her. Frank stared at him. You don't know this family. No, Peter said. But I know the records. Silence stretched across the table. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Someone's phone buzzed and nobody checked it. Finally, I opened the thin folder I had brought for myself. There was only one page inside. I'm not paying anything going forward that I am not legally obligated to pay, I said. I'm not signing property or estate documents without independent review. I'm not discussing money over dinner, over voicemail, or in the family group chat. Anything financial goes through Peter. My mother wiped her face. And us? Are we supposed to go through a lawyer to speak to our daughter? I thought about the dinner table, the card table, the unopened pie. The way nobody looked at me when my father told me to live on the street. No, I said. You need a lawyer because of the money. You need accountability because of everything else. Grant scoffed. So that's it? You're just cutting everyone off. I'm cutting off access, Lydia whispered. Grant stopped talking. That was when I knew she had finally understood enough to protect herself. The meeting didn't end with hugs or forgiveness. Real meetings like that don't. They end with folders closing, chairs scraping, and people realizing they can't force the old roles back into place just because the truth is inconvenient. My parents left with instructions to get independent legal counsel. Grant left with Lydia walking 2 steps ahead of him. Aunt Marlene lingered by the door. Beatrice, she said. I stopped. She looked older than she had at dinner. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. I believed that she was sorry. I also believe she had stayed quiet because my pain had been easier to live with than my father's anger. Thank you for saying that, I said. She nodded, waiting for more. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe warmth. Maybe permission to feel better. I didn't give it. Over the next month, relatives appeared like rain after a drought. A cousin texted. I had no idea you were dealing with all that. Another wrote. That dinner was awful. I should have said something. Someone else asked, so what exactly do you do now? That one I deleted. Aunt Marlene sent a longer message. She admitted she had known about at least 2 emergencies I had helped with and had never corrected my mother when Ellen implied Grant had handled things. She said she was ashamed. I saved that message. I didn't answer right away. My parents' situation didn't explode overnight. That would have been too dramatic and too easy. They had to set up payment plans. The house transfer to Grant stalled. Their attorney had questions. Their insurance had to be reinstated without my automatic safety net. The tax issue became something Frank had to discuss with people who didn't care about his pride. And Grant's shiny image did what cheap paint does in the rain. It ran. Lydia stopped defending him in the group chat. Then she stopped appearing in it at all. Grant sent one long message about private family matters and unfair narratives, which convinced nobody who had seen the documents. My father called me 2 more times. The first voicemail was angry. You made your point. This has gone too far. The second was quieter. We thought Grant had it handled. That phrase started showing up everywhere. From my mother. From Marlene. From cousins. We thought Grant had it handled. It was the family's new prayer. A way to admit the truth without naming the sin. My mother eventually sent me a letter. Not an email. A real letter in her careful handwriting. She said she was sorry for the dinner. She said my father had been harsh. She said they were under stress. She said they had always loved me, even when they didn't understand me. Then near the end she wrote, "Family helps family, and I hope one day you remember that." I sat at my kitchen table with that letter for a long time. The old me would have cried over the apology part and ignored the hook buried inside it. The new me underlined the sentence in my mind and set the letter in a drawer. I didn't respond. Peter asked me once, gently, if I wanted to pursue recovery of any documented payments where repayment terms existed. I told him to preserve my options. That was another thing I had learned. You don't have to make every final decision while people are still bleeding on your floor and calling the stain your fault. For now I wanted distance. I wanted silence. I wanted mornings where my phone didn't light up with emergencies disguised as affection. I blocked the family group chat. I deleted old payment reminders. I moved my folders into a secure archive and stopped opening them every night, like touching the proof would make the years less wasted. And I admitted the part that embarrassed me most. I had stayed too long. I had paid too much. I had confused being useful with being loved. That wasn't my parents' fault alone. They built the system, but I kept funding it because some part of me still thought there was a number high enough, a rescue quiet enough, a sacrifice clean enough to make them turn toward me and say, "We see you now." They never said it. They might never say it. But the strangest thing happened after I stopped waiting. My life got quieter and I didn't feel empty. I felt like someone had finally turned off a machine that had been humming in the walls for decades. I still heard updates even when I didn't ask. Grant was dealing with creditors. My parents had to restructure what they could and explain more than they wanted. The house stayed theirs for the time being, but not because Grant saved it. Not because Frank controlled everything. Not because Ellen cried in the right direction. It stayed theirs under review with lawyers' payment plans, and the kind of paperwork my family used to mock until paperwork became the only thing standing between them and consequences. I saw my parents once after that, by accident, outside a small restaurant where I had met a friend for lunch. My mother spotted me first. She looked hopeful and frightened at the same time. "Beatrice," she said. My father stood beside her, shoulders stiff, mouth set in a line. For a second I was back at the dining table. Card table. Plastic fork. Grant smirking. My father pointing toward the hallway. Then I wasn't. I was a 47-year-old woman standing in daylight with my own keys in my hand, my own name on my accounts, my own life intact. "Hello, Mom," I said. "Dad." My mother's eyes filled. "Can we talk?" "Not here." "When?" she asked. "When I'm ready." My father looked like he wanted to object. Then for once he didn't. I walked away without shaking. That was the moment I understood I hadn't left with nothing. They said I walked away from family. They said I acted cold. They said I ruined things by bringing lawyers into business that should have stayed private. But private was where they had hurt me. Private was where they had used me. Private was where they had taken the money and kept the story. So no, I didn't regret walking out. I didn't regret stopping the payments. I didn't regret letting the truth arrive in envelopes, records, screenshots, and calm legal sentences instead of one more desperate argument at a dinner table. My parents lost the daughter who could be shamed into silence. Grant lost the family myth that kept him polished. And I lost the need to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. They told me to go live on the street because they thought I needed them. They were wrong. I walked away with my name, my peace, and the life I built while they were too busy calling me a failure. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.